The dawn broke slowly over Port Moresby, painting the horizon in shades of amber and crimson. The humid air pressed down like a wet blanket even at 5 in the morning, carrying with it the scent of the jungle, damp earth, decaying vegetation, and the sharp tang of aviation fuel mixing with salt from the distant sea. Flight Lieutenant John Archer stood on the edge of the runway, his leather flight jacket already clinging to his shoulders despite the early hour. At 24, he looked older, the kind of aging that comes not from years but from responsibility. His eyes, blue as the Australian sky he'd grown up under, traced the silhouette of his aircraft, a Bristol Beaufort torpedo bomber, its twin engines gleaming dully in the pre-dawn light. Behind him, the sounds of the base waking up created a symphony of war, mechanics shouting instructions, engines coughing to life, the metallic clang of tools against aluminum. But John heard none of it. His mind was already over Leh, 170 miles to the north, where Japanese forces had established a stronghold that threatened everything Allied command had fought to protect. "Penny for your thoughts, Skipper?" John turned to find his navigator, Peter Bluey Morrison, approaching with 2 tin cups of what the men generously called coffee. Bluey was shorter, stockier, with red hair that had earned him his nickname back in Sydney. His grin was infectious, even here, even now. "Just thinking about the briefing," John said, accepting the cup. The liquid was bitter and lukewarm, but it was wet, and that was enough. "Thinking or worrying?" Bluey asked, his voice lower now. The grin had faded slightly. John didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of the terrible coffee and looked back at the Beaufort. She was beautiful in her own way, deadly, purposeful, scarred, like all of them had become. The briefing had been clear. 10 aircraft would take off at 0630 hours. Their target was the Japanese shipping and supply depot at Leh, a critical hub for enemy operations in New Guinea. Intelligence suggested the harbor would be crowded with vessels, transports, destroyers, perhaps even a light cruiser. Command wanted those ships on the bottom of the sea before they could reinforce Japanese positions further south. What the briefing hadn't mentioned, what nobody wanted to say aloud, was that this would be different. For months, they'd operated with relative freedom in these skies. The Japanese had been focused on their rapid advance through the Pacific, their attention divided across a dozen fronts. But things were changing. Reports of increased fighter presence, improved anti-aircraft positions, better coordination. The Empire was digging in, fortifying what they'd taken. Today would tell them just how much had changed. "Both, I suppose," John finally answered. "Bit of both." Bluey nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. They'd flown together for 8 months now, ever since they'd been reassigned from training duties to combat operations. 8 months of missions over hostile territory, of close calls and narrow escapes, of watching other crews fail to return. 8 months of becoming brothers in the only way war allowed, through shared fear and mutual survival. "The boys are ready," Bluey said, gesturing back toward the operations hut where the rest of the squadron was gathering. "Young Tommy keeps cracking jokes about seeing Tokyo from 10,000 feet. Reckon he's nervous." "Reckon we all are," John said quietly. The sun was climbing now, revealing the full extent of Port Moresby's makeshift military infrastructure. Tents and temporary structures sprawled across cleared jungle, connected by muddy paths that would turn to soup when the afternoon rains came. It was nothing like the proper RAF stations back in Britain that John had read about, nothing like the polished professionalism of pre-war military life. This was war stripped to its essentials: men, machines, and mud. Flight Sergeant Davies emerged from the operations hut, his weathered face grave as always. At 42, he was the oldest among them, a veteran of the First War who'd somehow found himself in this one. He walked with a slight limp, a reminder of Passchendaele he'd once mentioned while drunk on Navy rum. "Archer, Morrison, time to earn your keep." The briefing room fell silent as Wing Commander Harrison entered. He was a tall man, thin as a rail, with eyes that had seen too much. He'd commanded bombing raids over Germany before being transferred to the Pacific Theater. Nobody envied him the weight of his decisions. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, spreading a map across the table. "Today, we strike at the heart of Japanese operations in northern New Guinea. Lae Harbor. Intelligence confirms at least 12 vessels in port as of yesterday evening. Our objective is simple: maximum disruption of enemy supply lines." His finger traced a route on the map, north over the Owen Stanley Range, then down along the coast to Lae. A red circle marked their target. "You'll approach from the east at 8,000 feet, descending to attack altitude as you clear the headland. Expected opposition includes anti-aircraft positions here, here, and here." He tapped 3 points around the harbor. "Intelligence also suggests possible fighter presence. 0 models, fast, agile, and commanded by experienced pilots." A murmur ran through the room. The Mitsubishi A6M0 had earned a fearsome reputation in the Pacific. Faster and more maneuverable than anything the Allies could field, the Beaufort bombers, loaded with torpedoes and bombs, would be vulnerable. "Your primary targets are the transport vessels and any capital ships you encounter. Secondary targets are fuel depots and dock facilities. Remember, this isn't about glory. This is about making the Japanese pay for every mile of ocean between here and their homeland." Harrison's eyes swept across the assembled air crews. John saw the same look in each face, determination mixed with apprehension. They were volunteers all, men who'd traveled halfway around the world to defend a continent most had never seen before the war. "One more thing," Harrison added, his voice dropping slightly. "This operation has strategic significance beyond the immediate tactical objectives. Command believes that a successful strike at Lae will signal to the Japanese that their northern positions are vulnerable, that we can reach them, that Australia will not fall without a fight that costs them dearly." The weight of those words settled over the room like a physical presence. "Any questions?" Silence. "Then to your aircraft, and God go with you." The walk to the flight line felt longer than usual. John's boots crunched on the gravel, each step bringing him closer to the moment when thought would give way to action. Behind him, his crew followed in silence. Bluey with his navigation charts, Sergeant Williams who manned the defensive gun positions, and young Corporal Hayes, their wireless operator and bombardier. The rumble of twin Pratt & Whitney engines filled John's ears as the formation climbed steadily through the morning sky. 10 Bristol Beauforts arranged in loose combat formation, each one carrying enough ordnance to send a cargo ship to the bottom. Below them, the dense jungle of New Guinea stretched endlessly, a green carpet broken only by the jagged peaks of the Owen Stanley Range rising like ancient sentinels. John's hands rested lightly on the controls, feeling every vibration, every adjustment the aircraft made as it pushed through pockets of warm air rising from the jungle below. Flying had become second nature to him, as natural as breathing, as instinctive as heartbeat. But today, something felt different. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation. "Approaching the range, Skipper," Bluey's voice crackled through the intercom from his navigator's station behind the cockpit. "Should clear the peaks in about 12 minutes at current altitude." "Roger that." "How's everyone doing back there?" "Williams says his guns are ready to sing," came the reply, followed by a nervous laugh from the young gunner. "Hayes is checking the bomb release mechanisms. 3rd time this flight." John smiled despite himself. Hayes was thorough, sometimes too thorough. The 19-year-old had joined them only 6 weeks ago, replacing their previous bombardier who'd been transferred to training duties after his nerves gave out. Nobody blamed him. Some men could handle the constant pressure of combat operations, others couldn't. There was no shame in knowing your limits. The mountains rose ahead, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. At 8,000 feet, the Beauforts would clear them comfortably, but John had heard stories from other pilots about the treacherous downdrafts that could pull an aircraft into those unforgiving slopes. He kept his eyes on the altimeter, watching the needle hold steady. To his right, he could see Squadron Leader Matthews' aircraft maintaining formation. Matthews was a veteran, having flown reconnaissance missions over occupied Europe before volunteering for Pacific duty. If anyone would get them through this mission, it was Matthews leading from the front. The radio crackled to life. Matthews' calm voice cut through the static. "Blue Flight, this is Blue Leader. Weather looking clear on the other side. Expect a visual on the coast in approximately 20 minutes. Stay sharp, lads. This is where the real work begins." Acknowledgments came back from each aircraft in turn. John keyed his microphone. "Blue 5, understood." As they crossed the mountain range, the landscape below transformed. The jungle gave way to foothills, then to coastal plains dotted with small villages and winding rivers that reflected the morning sun like strips of silver ribbon. Beyond that, the Solomon Sea stretched to the horizon, a vast expanse of blue that looked deceptively peaceful. But John knew better. Somewhere in those waters, Japanese warships patrolled. Somewhere ahead, enemy fighters waited. And at Leh, their target sat in harbor, likely surrounded by every defensive weapon the Imperial forces could muster. "Contact, high and to the north." The call came from Blue 3. Every pilot's eyes snapped upward, scanning the sky. John's heart rate quickened, adrenaline beginning its familiar surge through his veins. "False alarm," Blue 3 corrected quickly. "Cloud formation. Sorry, chaps." A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the formation, but the tension remained. They were in hostile territory now. Every shadow could be an enemy. Every moment could bring contact. Bluey's voice came through again, steadier now. "Approaching the coast. Beginning descent profile in 3 minutes." John took a deep breath, centering himself the way his first flying instructor had taught him years ago in a peaceful Australian airfield that seemed to exist in another lifetime. The mission required focus. Fear was natural, useful even, keeping you sharp, but it couldn't be allowed to control. The aircraft responded to confidence, to steady hands and clear decisions. "All crew, this is Archer. We're about to begin our approach. Williams, keep your eyes on the sky. Hayes, run through the bombing procedure one more time. Bluey, give me constant updates on our position. We do this by the numbers, just like training. Stay calm, stay focused, and we all go home for tea tonight." The responses came back affirmative, though John could hear the tension in their voices. They were good men, all of them. They deserved to survive this. The formation banked gently left, beginning its descent toward the coast. The sea grew larger in John's windscreen, details becoming clearer. Whitecaps on the waves, the darker patches where reefs lurked beneath the surface, the thin line where water met land. And then he saw it. Leh Harbor spread out before them like a military artist's rendering. The town itself was small, clustered near the water's edge, but the harbor was full. John counted quickly. 3 large cargo vessels, 2 destroyers, several smaller craft. Supplies stacked on the docks. Buildings that had been converted to military use. And everywhere, the rising sun flag of Japan. Blue Flight, targets confirmed. Matthew's voice held a note of grim satisfaction. "Prepare for attack run. Remember, fast, low, and accurate. Make every bomb count." The formation spread out, each pilot selecting their approach vector. John pushed the control yoke forward, feeling the Beaufort's nose drop as they descended toward attack altitude. The engine note changed, rising in pitch as the aircraft picked up speed. 2,000 feet and descending, Bluey called out. "Range to target, 8 miles." The harbor was growing rapidly now, filling more of John's vision with each passing second. He could make out individual structures, see movement on the docks, small figures that were enemy soldiers going about their duties, unaware that death approached from the sky. Then the first anti-aircraft fire opened up. Puffs of black smoke appeared in the air ahead, blossoming like deadly flowers. The Japanese gunners had spotted them. Within seconds, more batteries joined in. filling the sky with explosive shells designed to shred aircraft and crew alike. "Flak at 10 o'clock!" Williams shouted. "Heavy concentration!" The Beaufort shuddered as a shell burst nearby, close enough that John felt the concussion through the airframe. He adjusted course slightly, weaving through the barrage while maintaining his approach to the target. Training had prepared him for this. The chaos, the noise, the natural instinct to pull up and flee. But training had also taught him that the only way through was forward. 1,500 feet, Bluey's voice remained remarkably steady. Target bearing dead ahead, range 4 miles. Another burst of flak, this one closer. John heard metal tear somewhere behind him. Not critical, but a reminder that they were flying through a storm of steel and explosive. "Blue 7 is hit." The call came over the radio, strained with pain. "Losing altitude, attempting to maintain." The transmission cut off. John risked a glance to his left and saw one of the Beauforts trailing smoke, its nose dropping as the pilot fought for control. His stomach clenched, but there was no time to watch, no time to help. The mission demanded everything. 1,000 feet, Bluey announced. "Range 2 miles. Hayes, prepare for bombing run." "Ready, Skipper." Hayes's voice was high with tension but determined. "Target locked. Awaiting your mark." The harbor filled John's entire field of vision now. He could see the cargo vessel dead ahead, its deck cluttered with equipment and supplies. Behind it, one of the destroyers sat at anchor, its gun crews scrambling to their positions. This was it. The moment that justified every hour of training, every sacrifice made to get here. The anti-aircraft fire intensified to a crescendo. Time seemed to slow as John leveled the Beaufort for its final approach. The cargo vessel loomed large in his windscreen, every detail crystallizing with terrifying clarity. He could see rust streaks on the hull, cargo nets draped over the side, even the faces of Japanese sailors looking up at the sky, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror as they realized what was coming. "Steady. Steady." Hayes's voice was tight with concentration. "Target acquired. Bomb doors open." The Beaufort shuddered slightly as the bomb bay doors swung down, increasing drag. John compensated instinctively, adjusting throttle and trim to maintain airspeed and altitude. 500 feet now. Low enough to see individual waves in the harbor, high enough to clear the masts of the ships below. The world erupted in fire and smoke. Anti-aircraft tracers arced up from multiple positions around the harbor, creating a lethal web of glowing projectiles. Each one represented a shell large enough to tear through aluminum and flesh with equal ease. John jinked left, then right, making himself a harder target while keeping the bomber lined up on its approach vector. 3 seconds. 2. 1. Bombs away. John felt the aircraft leap upward as nearly 2,000 pounds of high explosives dropped free. He immediately pulled back on the yoke, banking hard right to clear the harbor and avoid flying over the most concentrated anti-aircraft positions. The maneuver pressed him into his seat, G-forces making his vision narrow at the edges. Behind them, the world turned white. The explosion was massive. Their bombs had struck true, hitting the cargo vessel amidships. Secondary explosions followed as whatever the ship had been carrying ignited. Fuel, ammunition, or both. Flames climbed hundreds of feet into the air, and even through the closed canopy, John felt the heat wash over his aircraft. "Direct hit," Williams was shouting from his gun position. "The whole bloody ship is going up." But there was no time to celebrate. The radio was alive with urgent calls. "Blue 3, breaking left. Fighters at 2 o'clock high." John's blood ran cold. He craned his neck, searching the sky, and there they were, 4 dark shapes diving out of the sun. Zeros. The dreaded Japanese fighters were sleek and deadly, their maneuverability legendary. Against a loaded torpedo bomber, they were wolves among sheep. "Contact confirmed." Matthew's voice remained calm despite the chaos. "All aircraft, defensive formation." "Gunners, free to engage. The next minutes became a blur of motion and noise. John pushed the Beaufort to its limits, using every trick he'd learned to make his aircraft a difficult target. He flew low over the water, then climbed sharply, always turning, never allowing the Japanese pilots a steady shot. Behind him, Williams' twin machine guns hammered away, sending streams of tracers toward the pursuing fighters. A Zero flashed past John's canopy, so close he could see the pilot's face. Young, determined, focused. The enemy aircraft rolled inverted and came around for another pass, its wing-mounted cannons winking with muzzle flashes. Impacts. The distinctive sound of bullets punching through metal. John felt the Beaufort shudder, heard something tear loose behind him. Warning lights flickered on his instrument panel. "We're hit," Bluey called out. "Starboard engine losing oil pressure." John's eyes snapped to the gauges. Bluey was right. Oil pressure dropping, temperature rising. The starboard engine was dying. He feathered the propeller immediately, shutting down the engine before it could seize and catch fire, then applied full power to the port engine and compensated with rudder to keep the aircraft flying straight. "Can we make it home?" Williams asked, his voice tight. "We're about to find out," John replied, fighting to keep the Beaufort level as it struggled to maintain altitude on a single engine. Around them, the battle continued. Blue 2 was in flames, trailing smoke as it limped toward the coast. Blue 8 had disappeared entirely. Whether shot down or escaped, John couldn't tell. But several enemy ships were burning in the harbor behind them, massive columns of black smoke rising into the perfect blue sky like funeral pyres. They had accomplished their mission. Now they just had to survive it. Blue leader to all aircraft. Matthew's transmission was broken by static, but understandable. "Reform on me. We're heading home. Anyone too damaged to maintain formation. Make best speed independently. Good luck to you all." John checked his position. The coast was ahead, and beyond it, the Owen Stanley Range, 80 miles to Port Moresby. 80 miles on one engine, with holes in the fuselage and enemy fighters still prowling the skies. The mathematics of survival were not encouraging. "Bluey, plot me the most direct course home. Forget about avoiding rough terrain. We need the shortest distance." "Already on it, Skipper, bearing 185 degrees. Should put us over the lowest pass through the range." "Good man. Hayes, Williams, damage report." Williams spoke first. "Punctures in the tail section. Nothing critical." "Rudder, control, seems intact. Lost some equipment aft, but the main structure is solid. Wireless set took a hit," Hayes added. "I can receive, but can't transmit. And we've got a fuel leak from the starboard wing tank. Not massive, but we're losing AVGAS." John processed this information quickly. No radio meant they couldn't call for help or inform base of their condition. Fuel leak meant they might not have enough to reach Port Moresby. And on one engine, they couldn't maintain altitude if they encountered bad weather over the mountains. "Right then," he said, keeping his voice steady for the crew, "we conserve everything we can. Bluey, calculate our fuel consumption rate against distance to base. Williams, keep watching for fighters. Hayes, see if you can patch that leak, or at least slow it down." The acknowledgments came back, each man focusing on his task. This was what training was for. Not the glory or the excitement, but these moments when problems stacked upon problems and only disciplined teamwork kept you alive. The coast passed beneath them, jungle replacing water. John kept the Beaufort as low as he dared, using the terrain to mask their approach from any prowling enemy aircraft. Every mile gained was a small victory. Every minute airborne was time their pursuers might lose interest or run low on fuel themselves. "Skipper," Bluey's voice was carefully neutral. "I've run the numbers. With the fuel leak and our reduced airspeed on one engine, it's going to be close. Very close." "How close?" "We might have enough to reach the field. Might. If we don't encounter headwinds or have to climb higher than planned." John nodded, though Bluey couldn't see him. "Then we'll make it work. We've come this far." The mountains rose ahead, their peaks touching the clouds. The Beaufort climbed laboriously, the single engine straining against gravity and the aircraft's weight. John watched the altimeter crawl upward. 5,000 feet, 6,000, 7,000. They needed 8,000 to clear the pass safely, but at this rate of climb, the mountains would reach them first. "Come on, girl," John murmured to the aircraft, coaxing every ounce of performance from the struggling bomber. "Just a little more. You can do this." Behind him, John heard Hayes working on the fuel leak, heard the metallic sounds of improvised repairs, heard Williams scanning the sky, calling out clear sectors, heard Bluey recalculating their position against the mountains ahead. His crew, his responsibility, his family in this metal tube thousands of miles from home. The peak approached with agonizing slowness. The mountain pass loomed ahead like a stone gateway between life and death. John's altimeter read 7,800 feet, 200 feet below what they needed. The single engine howled with effort, pushing the wounded Beaufort upward inch by agonizing inch, but the mathematics of aviation were unforgiving. Weight, drag, and a failing power plant were conspiring against them. 7,900 feet, Bluey called out, his voice barely audible over the straining engine. Peak elevation, 8,050. 150 feet. The difference between clearing the pass and becoming another statistic, another cross on a map, another telegram delivered to families back home. John scanned the terrain ahead, his pilot's eye searching for options. To the left, a slightly lower saddle between peaks, perhaps 50 feet lower, but it would require a banking turn that might cost them precious altitude. Straight ahead, the main pass, narrow but direct. To the right, nothing but solid rock climbing into the clouds. "Hayes, we need to lighten the load. Anything we can throw out that isn't bolted down." "Already on it, Skipper." The young bombardier's voice was steady now, fear transformed into action. "Dumping spare ammunition, toolkits, anything loose." John felt the aircraft shudder slightly as equipment was pushed out through the bomb bay. Every pound helped, every ounce bought them precious feet of altitude. The altimeter needle crept upward, 7,920, 7,940, 7,960 feet. The mountain wall filled the windscreen. "Not going to make it," Williams said quietly, stating what they all knew. "Yes, we are," John replied, his voice harder than he felt. He pushed the throttle forward past the red line, demanding power the engine wasn't designed to give. The temperature gauge climbed into the danger zone, but that was a problem for later, if there was a later. 7,980 feet. The peaks rose on either side now, so close John could see individual trees clinging to the rocky slopes, could see the texture of moss-covered stones. The Beaufort was barely climbing, hanging in the air more by determination than aerodynamics. 7,990 feet. "Brace yourselves," John said quietly. The aircraft shuddered violently as a downdraft caught them. John felt the controls go mushy as the Beaufort lost airspeed, teetering on the edge of a stall. Every instinct screamed at him to push the nose down, to gain speed, to give the wings the airflow they needed. But pushing down meant hitting the mountain. Instead, he did something his instructors would have failed him for. He pulled back. The Beaufort's nose came up, the aircraft trading its last reserves of speed for a few more precious feet of altitude. The stall warning horn blared. The control yoke shook in John's hands. The engine screamed in protest. Time seemed to suspend itself, holding its breath. They cleared the peak by 15 feet. John felt the Beaufort slip over the ridgeline, felt the downdraft on the far side catch them and drop them sickeningly before he could recover control. But they were over. The mountain was behind them. Ahead, the terrain sloped downward toward the coastal plains and Port Moresby beyond. "We made it," Bluey whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually made it." But the relief was premature. The fuel gauge showed critical levels. The single engine was running dangerously hot, and they still had 40 miles to cover. John eased the throttle back slightly, allowing the engine to cool while they descended. The jungle below rushed past, a green blur punctuated by the occasional glint of a river. "Port Moresby Tower, this is Blue 5. Williams tried the radio again despite the damaged transmitter. "Blue 5 requesting priority landing. Single engine, low fuel, multiple casualties aboard," Static answered him. "Still nothing, Skipper. They can't hear us." "Then we'll just have to show up and hope they're watching," John replied. "Bluey, time to field? At current speed and descent rate. 18 minutes, maybe 20. John glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle hovered just above empty, fluctuating with each movement of the aircraft. 18 minutes. They might make it. Or they might end up making an emergency landing in the jungle, assuming they could find a clearing large enough. Neither option was appealing. The minutes crawled past. John kept the Beaufort in a gentle glide, preserving what little fuel remained while maintaining enough airspeed to control the damaged aircraft. Behind him, his crew was silent, each man lost in his own thoughts, processing what they'd survived, what they'd accomplished, what it had cost. Through breaks in the clouds, John caught glimpses of other aircraft from their formation, some trailing smoke, others flying at odd angles that suggested damage. Blue 2 was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Blue 7 or Blue 9. 3 aircraft, 3 crews. Faces John had seen at breakfast, voices he'd heard in the briefing room, men who'd trusted their commanders to bring them home. War's accounting was always paid in full. "There!" Williams shouted. "Port Moresby, dead ahead." John looked up and saw it, the sprawl of the base, the runway cutting through cleared jungle, the tiny shapes of vehicles and personnel moving about their duties. Home, safety, survival. The fuel gauge showed empty. "All crew, prepare for emergency landing. We're not going to have fuel for a second approach. This has to be perfect." John extended the landing gear manually, the hydraulics too damaged to function properly. He lowered the flaps incrementally, feeling how the Beaufort responded to each change. The single engine coughed once, twice, then caught again, burning the last dregs of fuel in the tank. The runway grew larger in the windscreen. John could see the fire trucks racing into position, could see the crash crew scrambling, could see other pilots and ground personnel stopping their work to watch. Everyone at Port Moresby knew what it meant when an aircraft came home this way. 500 feet. 400. 300. The engine died. In the sudden silence, broken only by the whistle of wind over damaged metal, John felt a strange calm descend. There were no more decisions to make, no more options to weigh. Physics would determine what happened next. His hands worked automatically, maintaining airspeed with the nose attitude, judging the glide path, compensating for the crosswind. 200 feet. 100. The runway threshold passed beneath them. John pulled back on the yoke, flaring the aircraft, bleeding off speed. The main wheels touched down with a screech of rubber, bounced once, then settled. John stood on the brakes, feeling the Beaufort slow, slow, slow. They rolled to a stop with 50 yards of runway remaining. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, simultaneously, the entire crew began to breathe again, releasing tension they'd held for over 2 hours. John's hands were shaking as he shut down the remaining systems. His legs felt like water when he tried to stand. The fire trucks surrounded them, but there was no fire. Ground crew appeared, examining the damage, whistling at the holes stitched across the fuselage, marveling that the aircraft had made it home at all. Wing Commander Harrison was there as John climbed down from the cockpit, his usually stern face showing something that might have been relief. "Well done, Archer. Bloody well done." John nodded, unable to form words yet. He looked back at his Beaufort, seeing her truly for the first time since landing. She was a wreck. Panels torn loose, entire sections of tail perforated by bullets, one engine completely destroyed. But she'd brought them home. She'd done her job. "The mission?" John finally managed to ask. Harrison's expression grew grave. 7 aircraft returned. 3 lost. But Ley Harbor. He paused, something fierce lighting his eyes. Ley Harbor is burning, Archer. 5 ships confirmed sunk, multiple facilities destroyed, enemy casualties estimated in the hundreds. Intelligence reports the Japanese are evacuating their remaining vessels. The numbers felt abstract to John. Enemy casualties, ships destroyed, strategic objectives achieved. All he could think about were the 3 crews that hadn't made it home. 3 aircraft worth of men who'd eaten breakfast alongside him that morning. The Japanese know now, Harrison continued quietly, as if reading John's thoughts. They know the North isn't safe, that we can reach them, that Australia won't fall without them paying for every inch. John looked toward the horizon, toward the mountains they'd barely cleared, toward Ley somewhere beyond. The mission had succeeded, the strategic objective achieved, but success always carried a price, paid in courage and blood and the empty seats at tomorrow's briefing. Bluey appeared beside him, oil-stained and exhausted but grinning. "Fancy a cup of that terrible coffee, Skipper?" "Best offer I've had all day," John replied, managing a tired smile. As they walked toward the operations hut, John heard the sound of aircraft engines in the distance, more bombers returning home, more crews that had survived, and somewhere in the planning rooms he knew, commanders were already looking at maps, choosing the next target, preparing the next mission. The war would continue tomorrow. But today they had struck back. Today they had shown that distance and defenses weren't enough to protect the enemy. Today, Flight Lieutenant John Archer and the men of his crew had become part of something larger than themselves. A message written in fire and smoke across the Pacific sky. Australia would not fall. Not without a fight.